Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 5 of Tabletop for Two, a D&D duet show where we take a deep dive in how to play one-on-one 5e. We were just admiring the really cute emotes. Is that what they're called? Emotes in the chat. Just so everybody knows and can be super excited with us, we recently became, is it affiliates?
Yes.
Twitch affiliates,
Twitch
right? And so now we can get our own
affiliates.
Stickers. Working on a sticker list to send to our lovely friends.
Super legit. We'll have achieved legitimacy.
And one of our favorite friends in chat, we promise to get you our list of stickers soon. Okay, sorry. Before we begin, who are we? My name is Beth Ball. I'm a game designer and fantasy author, one of the two writers, and readers behind D&D Duet. Joining me tonight is Jonathan Ball, a game designer and educator, and the other half of D&D Duet. Hello, Pink Sparkle. So good to see you. And hello to Zeke. Our work for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons centers around adventures and advice for playing one-on-one D&D, so you can create a whole world just for two. If you'd like to learn more about this special playing style or find adventures to help you along your way, you can go to dndduet.com. You can also follow us on socials, on Twitter and Instagram, or at D&D Duet. Honey, in this episode, we are covering how to co-create the world of your one-on-one campaign and why that's important. Friends on YouTube. So I actually figured out this really cool way of conceptualizing why this is so important for our one-on-one games. And as I was talking to Matthew Whitby earlier on the Dungeon Masters Guild house for the show and the podcast, so that I'm excited about, that will be out this coming week. Anyway, so if we think about players and dungeon masters on kind of opposite sides of a spectrum, but opposite sides of a spectrum. Great, we'll talk about that later. If we think of them that way, in a one-on-one game, that co-creation, the collaboration is so important because really each side has kind of taken a step closer to the other. So there are some DME aspects to what the player is being asked to do, and there are some playery aspects to what the DM is needing to do. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about tonight, because we want these games to be as interactive as possible. So how can we, as whether you're the DM or the player, how can you bring story details, character motivations, and plot momentum to the table? And so that's what we'll find out. But briefly, Honey, do you want to give a special thank you to our patrons?
Oh, yes. So all of our video content, as always, is brought to you by our lovely patrons. Our wonderful patrons just support, and they're the fuel in our tanks, our creative tanks, and so we're super grateful for them. If you want to check out our Patreon, then we would love to join you over there at patreon.com/Grove Guardian Press. Our patrons get a one-on-one D&D adventure and support our content and are helping us put together a whole one-on-one Land of Vampires campaign book, which is going to be, it's going to be hella cool is what it's going to be. Our sponsor for this particular show, though, is some of our D&D adventures that we have over on DM's Guild. You can check out the Crystalline Curse trilogy, Where It All Began. It's currently, you can get the adventures individually, pay what you want on DM's Guild, or you can enjoy the convenience of the bundle. And then we also really love Cupid Sparrow. It's a fun Valentine's Day or Sune's Day, any kind of romantic kind of thing that you want to do with another person sitting across the table from you. It's a role play heavy, just a fun little role play experience. So check out our work over there, and let's see. Yep. So, Honey, let's talk collaborative world building.
Okay.
So what does collaborative world building mean to you?
Okay, so to me, collaborative world building means that both parties, the GM and the player, are bringing details about the story world and how it works to the gaming table. So I do want to kind of specify when we're talking about this, some of these can be kind of small in terms of the level or amount of detail. A lot of times we think about world building, we conceptualize the map and here are the details about these civilizations and what's the world history. We don't necessarily, I don't think it has to be quite at that scale in a one-on-one session. So what might be most natural is for the DM to figure out a lot of those details themselves, but the player can add in smaller details. And you can of course arrange it differently if you want. So maybe the player brings lots of details about the place where their PC is from, especially if the adventure is starting somewhere else or the campaign is starting somewhere else. But again, the hyperactivity or hyper interaction of duet style D&D makes it a conversation between the two people at the table. And so GMs, in order to center the story around the PC, you want to invite them to contribute as many details, as many actions as possible to the world of the game. And then players, the GM is depending on you to help build out the world of the story, to add your own unique take, and to kind of figure out where your character wants to go.
That's one of my favorite things about running a one-on-one game of D&D is because it's so much easier and more fun and more immersive and more surprising and more interesting. If I as the GM just don't have all the answers all the time, right? It's way more exciting to see what kinds of twists and turns and wrinkles that the player is going to add into the whole experience. And I love about it too that it gives the player that ownership in the experience that oftentimes just the GM feels. At a group table, we have these different characters who are running around and kind of playing with the stage that the GM has set up. Whereas in a one-on-one game, it's kind of the stage that both of you have crafted, and maybe the DM knows a little bit more about what's behind the scenes and what is perhaps coming around the corner, but the player gets to be so much more involved in setting up the pieces, as it were. I think it's the collaborative world building too that's made the playing one-on-one so fun for you and I, outside of just playing the game, right? We talk about the world that we've created, and we, I really enjoy listening to you speculate about what you think is going to happen next, or where your character is at, or how you perceived an interaction between your PC and one of my NPCs. And sometimes it's totally a revelation to me. I didn't realize that your character was thinking what the heck is that? I was doo, 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 right? And that can be a lot of fun. That kind of discovery.
And I think that our world is richer for having built it together than it would ever have been just one of us creating it or the other one creating it. And that's what we really hope is the case at everyone's DM table. Even if you're working in an already existing setting, maybe you're working in the Forgotten Realms, you can still personalize the world of your game. And I wanted to go back on something that you said a second ago, the being okay with not having everything quite so set up. Did you feel that way when you first started DMing?
I think that's a great question. I mean, as a newbie DM, I did what I see a lot of newbie DMs doing tons and tons and tons and tons of prep. I was trying to figure out, what did this store have in it, and what would the prices be, and what was the shopkeeper's backstory, and did this small settlement have a strong presence of lumberjacks or a medium presence of lumberjacks? What? That doesn't make sense. Why would anybody need to know that? I don't need an almanac or an atlas of the world. And I think that part of the risk of over planning and over setting up your world and just knowing all the answers, that can be a lot of fun. but to me, that like if you already know all the answers, then it's not as inviting for the player to add in their kind of experience to the world. If you already know that, well, there is a very limited number of lumberjacks in this Bodunk town, and the PC comes in and is like, well, last time I was here, there were, I remember, a preponderance of brawny men just walking out of the forest with trees over their shoulders. And you're like, no, that doesn't work. That is plot critical. Then you kind of shut the player out of that contribution. And this is a silly example, but I think having all the answers, it can seem like from the outside that DMs have all the answers. And so as a new DM, when you're running a campaign, you should therefore have all the answers. But it's a lie. Like, good DMs can make you feel like they have the answers, but... And then you sing the Lumberjack song. Good DMs can make you feel like they have the answers, but that is not the case. It's not been my experience.
I'm really stuck on like what has happened to all of these lumberjacks in the
Where
little town.
are the
they okay? Did
lumberjacks?
they move on?
We can do the next one shot that we write is going to be lumberjack centric.
I think that's a great idea. And we will know what happened to them, and everyone can find out. I will say, so if we are working toward like a transition point, for example, in our game between two arcs, we will, like, I'll tell you. So if you're DMing this particular thing for us, I'll tell you kind of what my PC is leaning toward or what she's thinking about doing, so that you do know. And so I think that is a kind of key point to throw in. And that's part of the collaborative world building that maybe even often happens off the table, or maybe after a session or after you've had a chance to kind of think about it or reflect. That's not the way in which I'm looking to surprise you. Like, ta-da, we're not going in the place that you've been setting up. We're going to be going over here, because I do want you to be able to make the best use of your time, just like I want to make the best use of my time and what I'm thinking about for my character. And so we are really open about, especially for me when I'm the player, I want you to know what's going on with my character, what she's thinking about, kind of what she's planning or where she's orienting herself. And so that's something that I do recommend for the players. So you and the DM are not in an adversarial relationship. DMs, you and the player in one-on-one D&D especially, are not in an adversarial relationship. You guys are working together to tell this story and create this immersive experience. And on DM prep, I just wanted to add in, I've been studying archetypes a lot this last week and thinking about them a lot. We are innately storytelling creatures, storytelling beings. We love and live in stories all the time. That's how we make sense of our reality. So you can trust yourself to figure out what needs to happen next in a particular moment in the story that you are telling together with this other person. So you don't have to come up with some sort of crazy off the wall thing to have happen if that's what you're worried about, or an immediate solution. Those will tend to present themselves as you go.
Yeah, and I think looking out for those patterns too, like when you're setting up your sessions and when you're interacting with your sessions, like I find that the more I learn and the more that I read and the more that I know it to anticipate, or like I see like archetypes and things like that, like it makes the experience, it can make the experience of the table richer too.
Mm-hmm. And that's something for me. I think like saying that and then feeling that at the table can be really, really different. So for me, I still often feel self-conscious at the end of a session, or like, did that go well? I'm not sure. Even if like you've had fun during Tales of Eldora and I've had fun and people in chat have had fun, it's still like, still have those kind of post DM nerves. And I think that everybody has those. I just think it's important to kind of recognize them.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So when you're feeling like post game nerves, does that only happen when you're DMing, or does it happen also when you're playing?
It almost only happens when I'm DMing. Because with my characters, I know where they're coming from.
Mm.
And as long as I didn't accidentally do something that I feel like was off for them, then I'm totally happy.
I feel the I totally get the post game like DM nerves a lot of times. Like sometimes I just know that I killed it. I'm like, yes. Um, but I feel that way sometimes as a player too, and maybe it's because I'm mostly a player on stream, like, and we're playing for an audience. Um, but there's a little bit of that too, and I think that maybe that also comes with the um, like co-creative part, because like you have skin in the game, right? As a player
Mm.
of a one-on-one game, I think that a little bit of aftercare, like can be
Yeah.
helpful, especially for DMs of one-on-one games, but also for the players, right? Like have a debrief. Fate of Easton in the chat, new follower, whoop whoop, said, I cheat and ask for favorite moments sometimes. I think that's a great idea. Like, let's
Yes.
debrief and focus on the fun that was had, especially when, like, I feel weird sometimes when we get into something that's like really dark or heavy or painful for your character. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I am killing the person I love the most in the world right now, because you're sitting across from me very upset, and sad about something that's happened. I'm like, I did this. And it can be helpful because you also don't have, like, in a one-on-one game, you don't have the other people around to, somebody tells a dumb joke and somebody makes a Die Hard reference in the middle of your heavy scene, right? Like, you don't have that if it's just the two of you playing. And you and I usually play pretty serious D&D, right? Like, we're like, D&D, and let's, like, you know,
Um, as an Enneagram 4, I'm like, let's get into the really deep moments and then we'll just live there in this like really intense experience. So yeah, no worries about that. A good question in the chat, and just in case whoever is watching or listening can't see the chat, we're getting lots of assent on the pre-post DM nerves. I'm really happy it's not just me. I think it's so important to recognize too, because that's where imposter syndrome, I think, can start to get really huge and horrible, of like, oh my gosh, no other DMs feel this way. It's just me. Maybe I shouldn't be doing it. Or however you want to catastrophize it. It's, we all experience it. But so where does that come from? Is it because we feel like other people's enjoyment of the game is our responsibility when we're sitting in the DM chair?
I think it's part of it, right? I really like Matt Colville's DM videos, and I'll never forget this one time he just articulated something that I had been feeling but unable to articulate. He did it so simply. He said that, like, when I'm a player, then I run around and I just, like, I throw dice and kill monsters, and I'm this character and I just have fun that way. But as the DM, a lot of my enjoyment is coming from your enjoyment of the
Mm.
kind of stage that I've created or the story that I'm trying to tell. And yeah, like in the moment, I don't know, DMing is so rewarding because it's kind of there's a little bit more of a delay in it's not instant gratification in the way that, smashing a skeleton's skull open is, right? Like it's more of like a, yes, right? Like you have to, like, it's a longer term experience, I guess.
Mm.
DMing's crazy. If you haven't done it yet, I feel it's one of the things that I feel like proselytizy about. What's the word? Evangelical about. I feel
That you
evangelical
advocate for? Oh,
about people DMing who like D&D. You should DM because it's a different kind of experience, but it's so rewarding. That was a little bit of a tangent, but
yes. I think totally worth having. So speaking of DMing and kind of what's important, especially, and so kind of bringing us back to one-on-one D&D. I wanted to address best practices for GMs and players, and they're actually super related, as well as super related to this topic of co-creation. And this is probably where I meant to have the in the thing for our for people on YouTube. There we have a couple of posts on these specific topics. So for GMs, establishing trust is the key. So to reiterate, it's not you versus the player. The two of you are working together. You want to invite them in as much as possible. And players, your job is to come to the table knowing what it is that your character wants and communicate that with the GM. I know for me, I spend as much, if not more, time thinking about what my character wants during the course of the week as I do thinking about our Tales of Eldora game that I'm going to be DMing for. The way that that works out, or the way that that time works out, is different. Whereas if I'm thinking about my character, that can just be kind of in my head. Whereas if I'm planning, I tend to have my DM notebook nearby and writing things down and stuff like that. Or maybe I'm looking for creature inspiration on Pinterest or something like that. Whereas I don't tend to do that for my characters, but it's still, and depending on the amount of play and what's going on, sometimes I have a better sense, sometimes less. But I spend a lot of time as the player kind of reflecting on what's happened and making sure that I'm processing through that emotionally for my character.
Can I add to that too? Like knowing your character and what they want, and like that's, I don't know. That's also a function. That's the player putting in the work, right? Like that's what you're talking about. Really, is yeah. Like you're meeting your DM halfway, and you're going to be able to provide, because you've done that work and you've thought about it so much. You're going to be able to provide the DM with a direction of where you might go. And like I also appreciate that I can anticipate, like your characters are very rich, but I can, in a given situation, generally anticipate what path they're going to go down. And so as the DM, if I can anticipate which decision you're going to make, I can not only prep for that, but I can also prep for ways to complicate that path. So if I know that Persephone is going to do whatever she can do in order to make sure that her family is happy and safe and well, then as the DM, I'm not trying to make Persephone choose between saving her family and saving the orphan. I'm trying to make Persephone choose between saving her mom and saving her dad. That's a more interesting decision because I know that she's going to choose to save her family, if that makes sense.
Or even if your family's in one place, it could be a test of the, like, what are you willing to do or put on the line in order to save your family? So kind of test of those values.
Yeah. And before, I want to talk more about the trust part. And I think this kind of branches a little bit into a great question that we got in the chat. But in the chat, Fate of Easton asks, have you ever found that what you want was really surprising to the DM? And how do you deal with that in a one-on-one situation? You've thrown me some curveballs.
I don't know that they're curveballs, though, when I am throwing them out there necessarily, because they make sense to me.
And that's one of the cool things about the one-on-one situation, too, because if you do something that I'm just like, whoa, I can't believe that this is happening right now. Because there are some things that like kind of ended up in combat land that I didn't think would end up in combat land. And so, I don't know, that's a situation where we, like in a one-on-one game, I can say, wow, that was a really interesting decision. I didn't see that coming. So let's go make a snack. I'm going to think about this. We'll take the dogs out and, we'll rendezvous in 15 and we'll keep playing. Whereas at a table, you have 15 people that are just waiting. In a one-on-one situation, at a table, you have like 5 or 6 people who are waiting for like 15 minutes, as opposed to on a one-on-one situation, you have the flexibility to just like communicate, wow, I didn't see that coming. Let me prepare for this and make it good And sometimes I give you that option too. Like we can keep playing, and I'm gonna be throwing stuff together more, and it might be a little bit more loosey goosey, or we can pause here, and I'll come up with something stronger. And like that's, I don't know, like that's another decision that you get to help me make as a player. It's not just on me as the DM.
Yeah.
That's another thing. I mean, like,
And I know in those,
no, go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to say, and I know in those situations that I need to be giving more as the player too. So if we're going into land that's kind of mysterious to both of us, you need to know as much as possible from me, and I need to be ready to kind of add in those things as best as I can.
Yeah.
I do want to throw in a caveat too that we've been playing together for a couple years and like every weekend. And I think that I just don't want somebody who's like just starting their duet game to I want everyone to have like realistic expectations. Like we've hit some bumps along the way. It's not always rosy.
That's true. That's something that like we've made so many mistakes, and like um so many missteps, and like some of them have been really scary and really frustrating, but it's kind of working through those things too that has made us, I don't know, to the point where we can play every weekend, and like we have consistently good experiences. But yeah, those early mistakes are really important. And I think that what we learned from those, which is, I don't know, it seems so obvious to just say, but until you experience it, I don't know if it makes as much sense. Is like, there's nothing that beats clear communication and lots of it, right? Like when you're doing something like this, because there are feelings wrapped up around the co-creation of this shared world. It's a
Yeah.
special place that you're building together to run around in and have fun in. And if that thing if there's a miscommunication and that thing turns stressful, or like there's some kind of resentment or disappointment wrapped up in it, then that can feel like a really big deal, a really big problem. um, but it's not a problem that's too big that communication can't solve it.
And so sometimes just to be because I want us to be a little bit more specific too, like as or I want us to move towards how can we specifically do this or actionable steps. That can look like so if we're in a combat and this has happened, we've been in some really intense combats lately. So my PC's my friend was killed by mind flayer, like got his brain sucked out of his head. Um, so you paused because this is your DMPC, which just got his brain sucked out of his head. You paused to make sure that I was okay and to like take a second for you. And so it wasn't like a whole big thing, but it was like, okay, what do we do? And at that point, we kind of pulled, I see it as like kind of, emotional layers. It was kind of taking a step back of like, okay, we're going to come back to this moment and we're going to finish the combat, get this situation resolved, and then talk about kind of what's going on. So at that point, I'm kind of narrating more what my character is doing than doing those things as my character. Because I don't want to just like sit at the table and scream that like, somebody just got their brain sucked out of their head. That's not fun.
It would be surprising.
It would be surprising. But I think that those are, to me, those are important moments to recognize. And where he's itching, I couldn't figure out what he was doing. Let's talk for a second about what does encouraging collaborative world building look like from the DM's chair.
I think it touches on something that we mentioned, and that I think that we have been talking about a little bit, but I don't know, like that trust element is super important, and making sure that you're communicating that and giving the other person kind of the opportunity to add in their own stuff, and not communicating that what they're adding in is wrong, you know? And so, for instance, you know, well, E. Eliath, one of your first characters, grew up in this castle, and we spent some time, especially early on, and especially after some initial adventures with the return to that castle, running around in it. There would be people in there and places in there that are special to her and that she's experienced, and that I, as the DM, might not necessarily have to prep, because I can do something like, you know, well, Eliath, you're returning to the castle after your first adventure out in the big, mean world. You're a different person now. And as you walk through the halls of your youth, you know, what are you seeing? What are you reflecting about? Who are you looking out for? And then just letting you riff on that, your character's experiences, memories, and how they've changed or been colored by her recent experiences. That's one example of what we talk about when we're talking about collaborative world building, or the PC taking that step, you know, towards the DM role on the DM PC spectrum.
And I will say too, that was something that as a player, I wasn't sure about doing at first. And it took me a little bit to kind of warm up to it and to understand the types of details that would be helpful to bring to the table, or even interesting to bring to the table. So you asked me a couple of things during our first session, and I was like, because I hadn't prepped them, and I didn't want to be stuck with this answer. It felt very weighty. And
Or
looking
wrong.
back, it's like, yeah, I didn't want it to be wrong. That doesn't feel good either. And so it took a bit to recognize that those aren't quite the stakes that we're dealing with. I do think that, like, especially when you're working with the PC's backstory, somewhere that they've been before, asking them to talk about a memory that they have of a particular place or of a person, maybe an acquaintance, what was their last interaction with them like, and kind of tapping into some of those details can really kind of set the emotion of a scene and deepen the PC's immersion in a particular location, if they're kind of thinking about, or at least kind of keeping that in mind.
I would say too, as the DM, you can invite different levels of contribution and detail from your PC as well. Like if I'm if I'm bringing an NPC that I know is going to be a scumbag, then I can cue that this person is a scumbag to the PC, but still leave open places where they can fill in details, right? Like, you know, you walk around the corner and you see Lord Farquaad, and you you know, a deep feeling of revulsion, you know, settles into your stomach as you think about the crappy thing they said to you last time, right? And then, which was ... right? Like, that way you can let the PC know what you're looking for and still have that working in as well. And like that's one example, but it could be, you know, what they look like, or a memory, or a attitude, or interaction. Yeah.
And some of that comes down to knowing the PC, which I think is one of the advantages of even being a few sessions into a one-on-one campaign. You're going to know that PC well and be able to set things up for them. So in our Steinhardt campaign, for example, my character Braceris like walks into this town, and there are these religious zealots there, and she like kind of takes down her hood, and I can't remember if they wanted her to like put her hair back, or it was something like even just like a small amount of someone else trying to like be controlling over her person, and she just has like a zero tolerance for that. So she immediately hates everyone that she's around, and it spiraled really dramatically out of control. I actually, coming back to the question of things that were really surprising to the DM.
Oh my gosh. That's such a good example.
I burned down a city accidentally. Um,
It's not
that was a lot.
D&D
So anyway,
unless
it's
you
that same
occasionally burn down
city.
a city.
It was really sad. We accidentally killed like a whole bunch of innocent people. But this was our first campaign. Braceris is a ranger. She's super active. And I built her as close to a demon hunter character as I could. And she's like ready to do whatever she needs to do. Um, like she's like at 98% all the time and just needs to get to those final 2%. Whereas I feel like most characters stay at least at 70 or something like that. Anyway, so we're getting irritated and frustrated. And then oh, I got trapped in a building. And you're like, what do you do? And then I grabbed a torch and caught the curtains on fire. And so then, and the whole place is made of basically matchsticks and little dried wood. And so you're like, okay, we'll roll a D100 and we'll see how it goes. I roll 95. And you're like, okay, so you run out and 95% of the place burns to the ground. That was a really exciting experience that you weren't quite anticipating.
So it's also funny because I went to great lengths to describe the like this is a kind of a shanty town surrounding a town made of stone, and so I went to great lengths to describe like everything looks like a fire code violation. Everything's made out of reclaimed dried wood, and then the tower that you all were investigating and getting a fight with the guy there was called the Candle, and you all lit it up, which was awesome.
Just all the foreshadowing, as far as I was concerned with, said that in this stressful situation, we should light it on fire.
I also I love that DM standing next to the ashes of that plot hook. But it was cool because I specifically, I mean, that's one of the things too. Like you had a very rich character that I already knew some things about. And one thing that I knew about this character is that she was not going to like being asked to cover her hair. And so I put a little city in your way of people on, like there's some good people, there's some bad people. But one of the rules of this city was that you cover your hair. And so Braceris is immediately, right?
We were not interested in doing that at all.
That just like that, it was the whole situation was born out of you having a deep sense of your character and you as the player having done that work and communicated that to me in a way like through our gameplay that I was able to leverage into a really interesting experience for both of us.
And that helped when we were writing Land of Vampires. So if you were playing through our vampire campaign, I burnt down the city right outside of St. Sebastian, the Ring of Light. So that gave us some more ideas and things to tweak in case other people didn't want to burn it down like literally to the ground. But I think that little detail is really interesting. Again, kind of when we say collaborative world building, I feel like that can feel really huge. You need to know what kind of monsters are dwelling at the bottom of the ocean and how the tectonic plates of the earth are going to shift and when.
What is the flag of this city?
But in Tales of Eldora, as I was kind of prepping for our episode tonight, that was one of the things that I was thinking about. And Gareth and his chilled red wine is one of my favorite details about that campaign. And that was also one of my favorite moments in this show when I think it was Zeke asked you what Gareth would do for Valentine's Day, and you talked about taking some chilled red wine to your wife's grave and kind of pouring it there. But I just thought that was super sweet, and it's this gesture of love and remembrance. But that whenever that's coming in, it's Gareth remembering his wife. It's exercising his because that's the reason that she's the reason that you kind of have this path as a cleric, and that is also connecting you to your son, which is so at the base of your adventure. But I think that also, like, Garrett's relationship with his family is also tied to how he wants to protect Tessina when they're in a combat, for example. The fact that you are a cleric and, like, right up at the action of things, like, you have the highest AC and of our party for sure, but the highest AC of like most beginning level characters. I don't know. It can be really, really small details that do tie into those kind of larger character driven aspects. And I wanted to add into some of that is like some of this is how we like to play and the types of players and DMs that we are. Matt, you talked about Matt Colville earlier. He has that amazing video on the different types of players that will sit at your table, and I think that would be great for both players and DMs to look at and see kind of, okay, what does motivate me when I sit down at the table? What's fun? And having that conversation and what you think you like versus what you actually respond to at the table could be different, but you guys will figure that out as you play together.
Especially with all that open communication that's happening.
Also, I'm obsessed with chat tonight and the poor Berseris with her wanted posters. And I don't think there were as many arsonists, but like there weren't very many people left. But every time we ran into zombies for the whole rest of the campaign, you were like, well, they're wearing white from the Ring of Light from when you burnt it down. And then they got murdered out in the wilds, and now they're trying to kill you.
That was one of my favorite like early gifts that Berseris gave me for that campaign, was like having all of these people who before she showed up were safe and had not had like an incident with the super dangerous zombie and monster infested land of Steinmarad. And then she showed up, burnt it down, and the whole rest of the campaign I get to kind of like push that button. Fate of Easton had a good question.
Hey.
With one-on-one, do you ever just go, nah, actually not feeling it?
I don't. Do you?
I mean, there are times when there are certainly times where I think like all DMs can experience some DM burnout, because it's a lot to kind of like keep the plot moving forward and to have something interesting and different happening. And there are like a lot of different things to consider. And then there's also the we were talking earlier about like the responsibility that a lot of DMs feel for the fun that's generated at the table. And there are certainly times where, you know, I've experienced, I don't know, like I always know that it's going to be a fun time, and I always know that I'm going to enjoy it because I'm spending time with the person that I care about most in the world. But like it can feel sometimes like like not feeling it. And in reflection, that happened more earlier before we kind of got kind of our rhythm going a little bit. And it happened more, I think, because I was putting a lot of the I was shouldering a lot of the responsibility, and I was taking a lot of like burden of expectation that I didn't maybe necessarily need to be, right? Like it can be tempting, or something that I think can happen is, I don't know, like you as the DM, of course you want to do your best, and you're always swinging for the 110% mind-blowing game experience. But that's a really hard bar to set, you know, and like that's probably not necessarily what the person sitting across from you is actually expecting. Like I know, because we talk, that you would be happy being one of your characters running around the city talking to the DMPC, and you know, the most, I don't know, heart-pounding thing that happens is that they hold hands and go shopping, like it's gonna be fine. We're spending time together and running around this, like city that we've made in our minds together.
Mm.
But for me, it can be, that's one of the things that can lead to that feeling of DM burnout is like, oh, I need this, crazy epic thing to happen. And how am I going to figure out a way to attack the party when they're in the middle of their sanctuary? Because that's the only thing that I can think of that would be exciting, right? Like, it's going to be okay. And another thing that we did too is we started flipping those roles where you DM sometimes and I play, and I just don't have to, kind of be the only person shouldering that responsibility. What do you think? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I know for me with Tales of Eldora, we had to kind of take a break at the end of last year because I got a little bit stuck and had to do some soul searching about where do I want this narrative to go and what's going to set us up best, both for our stream and just for fun for us and our characters and kind of where we're heading, as well as I'll say for me personally, I feel like I'm still getting to know myself as a DM and what it is that I want to find fun or motivating and best at the table. And another thing that we've done sometimes is, and this is especially if we look at the campaign that we started with, so with Eliath and Marcone, if we had kind of a rut with something, we tend to put characters on like kind of a break, especially if we've just finished a big arc. I think that the transitions between arcs are the hardest for both the DM and the player, because as the DM, you're kind of trying to feel out what's coming up next. As the player, you're still kind of grappling with all of these things that have changed in the aftermath of this of whatever big event has occurred. And then it's like, okay, well, what do you do now? And we have found those kind of epilogue sessions when we're ending an arc are super satisfying, but then we have to kind of just let it sit and simmer. So for me, when I'm writing, if I get stuck on a particular scene or I'm not sure how something is going to go or play out, I've given myself a question that I don't have the answer to yet and just put that on the back burner and know that at some point my subconscious is going to figure that out. I think the same thing works for DMs in D&D. You can't necessarily push or rush it, and just sitting and thinking and mulling isn't going to be the answer. It's not going to help you get unstuck. But like you were saying too, with it can't be all heights. Like if stories are roller coasters, you need those exciting heights, but you also need those lower moments to kind of grapple with everything that's happened. And character development happens there too. So after your DMPC died, for example, we had a few sessions that were chill while we kind of figured out what does him coming back look like, how can we make that happen. But thinking about trust, for example, you told me like, it gets brain sucked out, we can bring him back, we'll figure that out. And so like I knew in that exact moment, because that's where the kind of rule of fun and in-game immersion kind of come to a head, is especially with PC death, you don't want the thing that's fun and stress relieving and enjoyable and connective to be threatened, because that does, at least for us, like it feels like a threat to not like your relationship, is that feels really weighty, but in the moment it can feel really like stressful and bad, and there's no reason for that. It doesn't increase the enjoyment of the game more for me to be like, oh my gosh, my mishandling of this combat has led to the death of your character, you're going to be really upset with me.
Now we can't hang out anymore. We're going to have to go to different sides of the house.
I'm so happy with this topic. This is super fun.
Yeah.
I have a question for you if this one doesn't spark anything, but do you have other examples of kind of what are ways that DMs can encourage collaborative world building in session? So I know if in one of our recent Tales of Eldora games, I knew that Gareth needed time to kind of wrap things up a little bit in the Eternal Forest before you guys left. And so just leaving that open for you, I know that you know your character and can tell me things that people he wants to talk to, stuff he wants to work on, what's happening with his Phoenix. And that's going to take its own amount of time, and I just need to have enough. I just need to understand the people who are there enough to respond. But that's really like you're driving that session and I'm facilitating where it is that your character is going.
Mm-hmm. Um, I don't know. I think that it's super important to have. I feel like it took us a while to figure this out, but it's super important for the DM to communicate that the character has the space to do that thing, and that isn't. I remember, when I was playing more Dungeons and Dragons, like with a group, that I was frequently self-conscious about like spotlighting myself, or like, I want to run around and my person's going to do this and my person's going to do that, and some people don't have a problem with that at all, and I didn't want to be those people, right? Like that are just kind of making it all about themselves. But that's one of the fun things about one-on-one games. Like, it's not weird or bad if your character is running around the stage and doing different things. And one of the things that I love about our Tales of Eldura game, and I love about being Gareth, is that he's imperfect, and he has blind spots, and I know what those are, and it's okay if he misses an opportunity to explore an aspect of another character because he's too busy thinking about his own thing, right? Or if he's insensitive to somebody, like that just, he's not a jerk, but he is just kind of he's got his own blind spots, right? And like, I think the most interesting thing is going to be when those blind spots catch up with him or put him into a bind or a scrape or something. Like that's the kind of stuff that's really fun to explore with more in-depth character development. And you don't get that without having the stage to run around and explore and to be that character a little bit.
Yeah, because it's the difference between getting to know the character as you are personifying them and making decisions about who they are and what they're like in advance. And that's part of, for me, the magic of one-on-one D&D that's so fun and rejuvenating, is that you are this character. And I think that's the case for all D&D, or I certainly hope so. But yeah, it does, that spotlighted, certainly less stressful or less self-consciousy. I don't know. I do want to say, since it's almost 9, lovely friends in chat, if you have other questions or things that you want to share, things you want us to address, we would love to hear those. And honey, so I have like one question for you, and then I have some quick, I don't know, Yashi things. I'm not sure. And maybe this would be a better question for like a future session, but I was thinking about, for our Land of Vampires campaign that you wrote for Berceris, how much of the location, like how much of the world did you have fleshed out when we first started versus what you added to it as we went?
I'm very much a pantser DM, and I discover a lot of the world by the seat of my pants, almost as the player is discovering it. Mm-hmm. And so I had a sketch of a spooky place that was bad and fallen, and it's obviously inspired a lot by the lovely work of Curse of Strahd and Barovia. And so kind of with that vibe, where a place, I'm often interested in like what are we expecting and how can that be taken and subverted or taken and dialed up. So if there are vampires here that are known, then what does a whole section of the population that is centered around the worship of blood, what does that look like? How is that expressed? Like, how can we take some aspect or trope and just dial it all the way up, or take some aspect or trope and turn it on its head, where we have a dark lord of the land that is maybe a little bit more complicated than it first appears, right? It's not just, I want to suck your blood. He's a little bit more like, I want to make out, but not just make out.
We do have a couple of questions in the chat. I think you're very silly. So in our time playing together, we experienced player death, and how did we continue? So we've had a couple, we were just talking to Lisa about this earlier. We've had combats where like my PC died. We've also had moments, and I think that it functions similarly since there's just the two of you. So like Persephone got hit or something by one of the little intellect devourers, like the brain dogs, and couldn't do anything. Like her intelligence fell to 1. And we're mid-session, mid-combat, in the middle of this underground space, and it's like, you can't do anything. So now what do we do? And we've kind of dealt with that situation in particular. I mean, she was not dead, but she can't talk to anybody. She can't do anything. She can't move herself around or communicate. And so you had Jack kind of, scoop her up, and he's toting her around and so then I took over being your DMPC and my sidekick character to run around in that instance. And so we kind of just switched. And then with Elliot, it was kind of a matter of like we got her revivified in that moment. We haven't had an all-out PC death, but we talk about that and what that would look like, what would happen. And so I know for the different DMPCs, for example, they're going to stop whatever it is that they're doing. Especially like I know that about your characters. They're going to stop what it is that they're doing and figure out a way to bring my character back. Like none of the goals they're chasing are so important to them as that revivification. We actually haven't had that conversation quite so much in our Tales of Eldura game, for instance. We would figure something out because, I mean, to us at least, the like main character dying isn't.
We can't play D&D anymore. We have to go stand at opposite sides of the house.
It's just like that's not quite as fun as like figuring out a creative solution. And so something happened to Gareth. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but if something happened to Gareth, Evelyn and Tessina would figure that out. Maybe they take him back to Patrick, and maybe Patrick has this magical way of bringing his father back to life. I don't know, but like we would find some way of bringing Gareth back. But that's one of those like stop the game, figure out, make sure everybody's okay, problem solve a little bit, and then you can keep going.
I just had a flash. I mean, Gareth is definitely going to die. Based on how terrible I've been rolling for him, he's... I don't know if this guy's gonna... I'm gonna try to make it, but I'm just saying, I get a sense.
Do you just get like a narrative flash of what happens to him?
Yes, actually. So Tessina and Evelyn get him back to Beacon and drag him up the chains and put his dead body in front of Patrick, and then whoop. Does the kid make that sound? Whoop. And so whoop, we go out of Gareth's dead POV and into Patrick. Patrick takes up the mantle of Vulcan in his father's name, becomes a paladin or something. I don't know. That seems to make sense.
Oh. It would leave Gareth dead?
Dead.
We're gonna have to talk about this more.
I'm kidding.
If that's the case, I need a backup plan prepared. Okay, so do we have any go-to tips or phrases that we use to form that can help with co-creation in the moment? Do they vary from one-on-one to group play? Like we were saying a little bit earlier, some of those questions can be really helpful. So What are you looking for? So we had a festival a little bit ago that I DM'd in our game where you normally DM. And so I set up a bunch of carnival-y games and things like that. But even when we switched back, I had some things picked out that my character wanted to do at the festival. Like, we want to find where the food on a stick is. And if there are barrels you can balance on and try to not fall off, we would like to do that. And then we want to go over here and do a tarot reading for some people to make up for the money that we lost at all the food on a stick stands. And then if we want to play those things out, we can. If we don't, we don't have to. So, um, other than asking a question, I'm not sure that, what do you think?
I absolutely agree. I think mostly it's kind of targeted questions like, what does this person look like? Or you go in here and what do you see? If it's just a generic tavern that they're visiting and you just, like, the only thing that you have prepped as the DM is a person that they need to talk to, then that's a great opportunity to invite the character to add in the, kind of box text for you. What do you see? What do you hear? What does it smell like? Involving the senses and asking questions. I think that's mostly the go-to move.
Or if we have like a period of downtime, we'll kind of end a session there and you'll let me know, like, okay, it's going to be 3-4 days before our next thing happens. Pick out what you want to see occur and scenes that you want us to play out over these couple days, and we'll do that in our next session. So some of this is like in the moment. So I wrote just a couple of these out before. Like, you've been to this tavern a few times before. What's it like? What are you expecting when you go inside? And then maybe you find out it burned to the ground when. Just kidding. Or this NPC is an acquaintance of yours, so you haven't seen them in a few years. What was your last experience with this character like? And so if you can kind of set someone up with their backstory and build from there, I think that can be really helpful. I always want to know what's going on inside of the character's mind and use that as kind of the jumping off point for adding in more details that they have about the world. But sometimes it's more like, what are we going to find in these fields? What are some stories that you've heard about the fetid plains? What are they like? And then that's on the player in a relatively chill way to come up with some details that they know kind of in the perspective of their character, things they've heard about this particular location, but it's still giving the player enough information to kind of build on. So we can't just be like, whatever, just throw something in. I think that would be stressful.
And I think to get the second half of that question, like, do the strategies vary from one-on-one to group play? I think that the same strategies can apply, of the DM asking those questions to have the character to prompt the character to fill in those details. But you're probably going to get a lot more of that in a one-on-one game versus a group game, because group games tend to, in my experience, they move a little at a different narrative pace. Sometimes the decision making is a little bit slower because you have many different people making decisions and discussing what to do next. And so they're just probably, I would say generally there's going to be less of that, which is one of the things that makes one-on-one D&D so special.
Is that co-creation something that you do with like the kids in D&D club?
The kids in D&D club and I have about an hour to play, and so I would say not as much as I would love. I might get to ask one question, and not even one question to each kid or each player, but like one question in the whole scope of things, like, oh, you want to break open the door. What does that look like? Or like, when you cast that spell, what did the other characters see? And so like they can describe with as much or as little detail as they want, like, where their magic is sourcing from and stuff like that. So, and we have a conversation usually about how it can be fun to show and not tell and stuff like that. So they're like a little bit primed for that.
Yeah. Although, I mean, what you just said, those worked really well as the sorts of questions of what does that look like. Um, it's similar to like if somebody's a little bit stuck and you want them to RP more. Can you tell me what that sounds like? And just kind of
Yeah.
inviting more from the player. But I especially like in combats getting to illustrate that, and we've been getting more into illustrating and talking about spell work, which I think has been really fun and exciting. As and that contributes to the story world. And in one-on-one specifically, you can always have the DMPC ask the PC something about themselves. So recently, Jack asked Persephone when she first started using magic and what that looked like, and so that let us talk about some cool things in the story world and her existence in the world that also kind of built their characters and relationship too. So all the things kind of compound in really cool ways. But since it is past our time, I had so much fun during our session tonight. Thank you, honey. And
Absolutely.
thank you all of our lovely friends in chat. This was lovely. Um, I do want to let you guys know that we have a new podcast, or I have a new podcast called World of Azuria, where you can turn in to hear the Age of Azuria series, along with some of the details and lore behind the world. So we just released episodes 4 and 5. And so we've gotten up to, I keep saying I've gotten up to chapter 4 of Aurora, and then did some details about the tarot reading that's in that chapter in episode 5. We've also had some really cool interviews and opportunities this past week, and so you'll see those coming up on our website soon. Um, and Tales of Eldora, hopefully we will be with power all weekend and into next week with the internet. We will return on Tuesday. Thank you guys so much for being patient with us. And our next episode of Tabletop for Two will be diving into D&D duets with kids. So if you have children and you're playing D&D with them and want to throw some details in, this is a topic we've had a couple people ask us for, and we think it's really important and want to talk about. We do not have children though, and the youngest person I played D&D with was 14. So we're hoping to outsource some of the advice. I think some of the principles will be easily adaptable, and of course it's going to be unique for each parent and child. But yeah, just throwing that out there. If you have pearls of wisdom that you want to share with other parents who are playing D&D, please do that. That would be awesome. Oh.
We're very upset. Our fuzzy children are not good at rolling dice or taking notes. Their paws just doesn't allow for it.
Do it.
Thank you all so much for joining us Thank you all so much for joining us here on Tabletop for Two. You can catch us live here on Twitch at 8 p.m. Eastern Time every Friday, talking all things one-on-one D&D. Our live stream Tales of Eldora happens on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We put replays of the shows on YouTube for your VOD pleasure. If you enjoyed this show and would like to support our work, we'd love for you to buy our adventures at dndduet.com, as well as support us on Patreon over on patreon.com/Grove Guardian Press. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening. Happy gaming. I just extra appreciate the wonderful interaction in the chat and the really, really good thought-provoking questions. It's fun to interact that way. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon.